Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, John Knocklinger. I'm a men's divorce coach and a New Jersey divorce attorney and mediator. Today, we're going to discuss the impact of divorce on young children and how you as a parent can help your children thrive after their parents split. My guest today is Karen Molano. She is a clinical psychologist with more than 18 years of experience working with children and their families. Her goal is to help parents of young children ensure that they thrive in order to reach their full potential. Thank you for being here today, Karen.
So much for having me. It's such a pleasure. And thank you for the lovely intro there.
I love it. I mean, I think what you do is so interesting because there's not a lot of people, at least that I've seen, that concentrate on children ages, birth to 5. I think it's a really nice little niche that you have. And it's something that I really am interested to learn a lot more about today.
Thank you. Definitely in my time in this career, I definitely see that there is a massive gap in our focus in that area, which is literally the most important. 5 years are the most important in our lifetime. So I figured let's just really hone in on those.
Well, before we dive into everything that we're talking about today, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you got into this and how you started concentrating on this important age group?
Absolutely. So I've always worked with kids. It's always been a passion of mine. So in my career as a psychologist, I've worked with kiddos from birth all the way to young adults, so like 20-ish, and their families. And over the course of time, as I was mentioning, what I noticed is that kids were getting younger and younger in the sense of having diagnoses that were pretty severe. Like we have had kiddos that are 2 days old diagnosed with PTSD. Believe it or not, that is a thing, and you can diagnose them with that. And not only were they getting younger, but the issues were getting more and more severe. So I really started honing in on that age group, along with incorporating Eastern medicine, because I noticed that we really weren't supporting the brain and body in a way where it could genuinely do what it's supposed to do. And so over a course of my own difficulties, I've been through a divorce. I've been through a lot of health issues. I really took those two worlds, Eastern medicine and neuroscience and Western medicine, and bridged them together to really focus on those first 5 years.
Fascinating. Well, you've been talking about the first 5 years. Most of our listeners probably don't have any idea how important the first 5 years are. So can you tell us a little bit about what happens developmentally in those 5 years that really can impact a child the rest of their life?
Absolutely. So if you think about when a baby is born, there's all these neurons. They're very, very disorganized. So from that moment on, those neurons start to make connections in the brain, and they start to have these neural patterns that continue to fire and wire together. And so in those first 5 years is when we really build those neural pathways, those connections. So whether the experience is positive or negative, it's really going to start not only building the architecture of the brain, but it really starts to solidify the core beliefs that we have. So the way we view the world, the way we interact with others, the way we see everything starts in those first 5 years. So those core beliefs are really, really crucial to develop in those years. And we do it unintentionally. So we don't really think about how those core beliefs are being formed. But if we actually were intentional about it, I promise you that as adults, we wouldn't be reversing as many things. We wouldn't be trying to, get rid of all those of the fears and the self-doubt and the lack of worth that so many of us have, which typically happens in those first 5 years is when we develop those core beliefs.
And what are some core beliefs that are common amongst people that, in the world?
I would say the most common ones are, I am unworthy. I am not good enough. I am unlovable. I'm a failure. Those, I would say, are the ones that I see the absolute most. But the self-worth is a huge one. I would say all of us at some point have experienced that we're just not good enough or not worthy enough. And so that always gets in the way of our ability to achieve the next goal or have that life that we really want to have.
Now, what does that lead to? Like, let's use a self-worth issue. What does that lead to both in children and in adults?
What does it lead to? Well, you mentioned the area, and it'll impact anything and everything. It can impact your business. So whether you have a 9-to-5 job or you have your own business, when you have these beliefs about yourself, they're going to keep you from doing the things that you want. Let's say if they're negative beliefs. So the brain is very loyal. It's incredibly loyal. It believes anything and everything you tell it. So if you say, I am unworthy, even if you don't realize you're saying it, then the brain is going to look for evidence to support that belief. So it's like, oh, this person thinks they're unworthy. So I got to make sure that we hold up that belief. So even if there's 1,000 really wonderful things showing the opposite, the brain is going to focus on the ones that prove that you are unworthy. So then what happens? Now you have all these feelings. Now you get the rush of feelings of fear, of anxiety, of sadness, of anger, whatever it is that accompanies that for you. And then that is going to impact your behavior, because your behavior is going to be based on your beliefs and how you're feeling. So you may do things in a way that doesn't necessarily get you to where you want to get to. Now, the opposite happens when you have beliefs that are helpful. And that's why you see so many people. I'll give an example at the gym. Like, how come that person just works out for 2 days and they lose all this weight? And I put on, 10 hours a week and nothing is changing. A lot of that has to do with the core beliefs that are within you, because you have a belief, it leads to a feeling, it leads to a behavior. And the brain, again, is going to do anything and everything to support your belief because it is that loyal.
I think most new parents that would be listening to this have got to get a lot of anxiety listening to you talk about this, because basically what you could hear what you're saying as, we can really screw up our kids from the time they're born until they're 5 if we don't do things the right way. So I guess the question is, let's say you don't do things the right way and your kid's now 8 or 9 years old. Is all hope lost? Is there a way to change things?
No, I'm kidding. It's not good. That is one of the beautiful things about the brain. It is so incredibly plastic. Even with today's research, we found that even genetics don't play as big of a role as we thought they did, because of epigenetics, where you can turn genes on and off because of your environment and the way you're raised and the things that you're in. So that is actually something really beautiful, that you are not your brain. You can change it at any single point in life, no matter what age you are. Now, is it going to be a lot more challenging? Absolutely. It doesn't have to be. But unfortunately, we have the belief that it is really tough to change something once it is pretty stable. And so you then have to start going through layers and layers of all those years of belief systems, of the abuse we give to our bodies sometimes, the stress, because all of it is very symbiotic. It's all highly related, one with the other. How we take care of ourselves, the way we talk about ourselves, the way we see the world, it's all very connected. So no, hope is not lost. It's just obviously a little bit more challenging. So if we do it right from the start, during those first 5 years, it's going to be, not only is it going to be really, really different for that child in the long run, but it's going to be a completely different parenting experience, because you constantly hear parenting is so hard. It is so challenging. And we believe it to be, because that's the status quo. We've never seen it to be any other way. But when we actually can change the story and believe, like, wait, why does it have to be so? It doesn't have to be this way. When you do focus intentionally on those first 5 years, everything gets easier. Parenting gets easier. The teenage years get easier. Adult life gets easier. It's just this beautiful flow, a lot more ease and flow. And it's not that we avoid adversity, because adversity is always going to happen. We need adversity in order to really understand and clarify what we want, what we don't want, and to continue to evolve. The difference is how we address that adversity. So our children, when we really intentionally focus on wiring the brain intentionally, building the architecture of the brain intentionally, now when they do face adversity, it's a whole other world. It's so much easier for them and for the parents.
Well, parents, that word is plural, right? So now we've got two people that are part of this. So I kind of have two issues I'd like you to address. One
Absolutely.
is how can one person with two parents, how can one person do a lot of damage by themselves? Because obviously you've got to have two parents that are helping, help form this child's subconscious and the way they look at the world, the way they process information. And then once you go through this period till they get to 5, let's say you do everything right. Let's say both parents are on the same page. Let's say you do everything right. They've talked to someone like you and they've learned sort of good practices on helping your child. How do you know if you succeeded? How long do you have to wait? How old do they have to be before you start to see whether they've got some of these core values and beliefs that are detrimental as opposed to helpful?
It's an everyday. It's an everyday, meaning you see the results right away because your children are always speaking to you. Even when they don't have words to speak to you, they're speaking to you. Babies even have a language that often parents know it intuitively, but oftentimes we miss a lot of the cues in the language that our babies speak because we don't know how to read them, right? We don't, unfortunately, we don't go out and get trained as to how to be parents, which is the part where I feel like there's a huge gap. But you can see results right away. You can see them over time. I'll give you an example. My son is 10 years old, and this is something that I've been doing with him since he was in my womb. So from the moment of conception, I've been doing the best I can with what I have and the tools I have as a parent. So first of all, I do want to send the message that you are enough as a parent, that you are amazing. And we are so hard on ourselves sometimes. And oh my goodness, I'm gonna screw up my kid. But the reality is that you're doing the best that you can with the tools that you have. And the more intentional you are, the better it's going to get. So it's not about being perfect. It's about knowing how to repair when things break down, because we are human. We're never going to be perfect. And so with my son, for example, as I was going to mention, the other day he was working on his own. He's just doing some sort of assignment. He's like, oh, I can't do this. This is too hard. I had to say nothing. He stopped himself and he said, wait a minute. That's just a belief. I don't have to believe that. I can believe that this can be a lot easier. I've got this. And he just started just shifting that thought process pretty quickly. So that's an example. Another one was even money beliefs, because there's beliefs about everything. He was watching some show and he says, Mom, wouldn't it be so great if we could just go out and buy a yacht? Then he stops himself and goes, wait, why can't we? Why can't we do that? Maybe one day I'll be able to do that. Why do I have to believe that I cannot? And so you start to see that from a very early age, just on the way that children not just speak, but the way they behave and the way they interact around you. And I also want to incorporate that it's not just the parents. Every single experience that a child has is important. So every single experience with the daycare, the neighbor, the friends, family members are going to impact that little brain. So the more we're intentional about our surroundings and who we're around and the value that we're adding, the better it's going to be. So I don't think the responsibility ever falls on one parent. However, the more we can intentionally do, the more positive experiences that child is going to have.
Sure. And I think everything you're talking about, it's a life. You do this your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to show you because you brought this up. I have a Post-it on my computer monitor and I just took it off. It says, I am enough. And I put it there every day. It's been there for a while. Mm-hmm. I mean, like you, I've been through training as an adult to try to overcome some of those core beliefs that have been detrimental to me getting where I want to be in life. And I just want, we're talking about young children. It's a lifelong thing that you're doing. It's never done. You're never, it's always, that's why they call it personal development. You're not ever fully developed as a person. You always have to continue that development. But I love what you're talking about, that you can basically give your child a good head start on life by giving them better tools. I'm listening. I have a 10-year-old too, and I'm listening to you talk about your 10-year-old saying those things, and my jaw's on the floor right now, because I have not done as good of a job as you have, Karen, with my daughter. But again, it's one of those things where I think as parents, we all think that all we ever do is fail as a parent. Like, every time your child screams at you, every time, your child lies to you, every time your child says something that's just, I don't know, wrong. And I don't mean wrong, like factually wrong, but like, they say something that's offensive. You look at yourself in the mirror, like, what did I do that my child thought that was okay to say that, or to lie to me, or, to scream at me? What do you say to parents who are feeling like this every day? Because I think we all feel like this.
We all do. And including me. I mean, I clearly intentionally do this. This is what I do for a living. So that was my head start at parenting, right? And this is why I get frustrated with the fact that when you have a child, you're like, here you go home, figure it out. Good luck. That isn't fair to parents, because I honestly believe we do the best that we can with the tools that we have in that moment in time. And no one's ever said, hey, let's go to parenting school or anything like that. We do it for everything else, but not so much for parenting. And when it comes to us, there is this symbiosis, this need to really bring things together. So for the parents, it is so incredibly important and critical to look inward to see where your triggers are, because we have so many unconscious beliefs. We have so many unconscious thoughts. It's like 97% of our thoughts are automatic, 80% are negative, which to me is mind-blowing. And so when our children do things, typically it's a mirror reflection of where we're at, or something that we're experiencing possibly from our lives, whether it's our childhood or an event or something that happens that's triggering us. So when we can really stop and take a moment to, instead of dismiss the feeling, actually sit with it, which is something that we were never really taught to do, is to sit with our feelings. If they don't feel good, we just want to get rid of them. If they're too good, then we're too much. So basically, we're not supposed to feel. But when we can sit with a feeling and think, wow, what is it about this moment that I feel like a failure as a parent, or I'm feeling really angry at myself because I could have done things better? And you intentionally sit with that, that feeling's actually going to bring you a message. I think of feelings as messengers. They're here to tell you something about yourself that you're ready to let go of. And when you listen to them, you actually start to find those beliefs that are hidden within you that you can start to let go of. And when you can start to shift and rewire that brain within yourself, now whatever thing that was going on with your child, I promise you, it's not even going to bother you as much, or you're going to completely shift the perspective around it, because now you've shifted. So to me, it's not a, what can I do with my child? It's a co-creation of what's going on within me. And when I can shift that and I'm in alignment, now I can guide my child and allow them to be who they need to be as well.
Fascinating. I would assume that applies to just about everything in your life. Whenever you have a reaction to anything that happens in your life, you need to consider, why are you reacting that way? Why is it that you're having that particular reaction? Because I don't think people ever really fully think about that. Someone gets a promotion over you at work, or someone cuts you off on the road and you become this crazy person. I think we all could stand to sort of think about why we're reacting the way we are, and to have more self-reflection, because I don't think many people do. So there's so few people that actually invest in themselves and really invest in, trying to get to the bottom of those core beliefs that you've been talking about, that started when we were all very, very young, when we really didn't know how to think yet. We were just being taught how to think. And now it informs everything we do. So Karen, obviously this podcast is about divorce. We've been sort of laying the groundwork for talking about what we're going to talk about, which is you've got a child who's in the middle of a divorce, and they are in the middle of a divorce. They've got these two people who are separating, and no matter how well you do it, now you've separated, you're in two different households, your child's now being exposed to two different environments. Even if there was a cohesive environment before you got divorced, now you've got two different environments. There's a lot of emotion of divorce. Even people that don't outwardly talk bad about their ex-spouse, they still subconsciously do and say things that children pick up on very easily because they're so intuitive. We don't really give them credit for that. So let's start. I want to start talking about the do's and don'ts. So let's talk about you're separating, you're getting divorced, and your child is in this age group, the 0 to 5 age group. First of all, how do you think that the parent should explain what's about to happen to that child? And then once they actually set up in two different houses, what kind of ongoing communication between the parents and the child would you recommend to make sure that the child transitions as easily as possible?
I'm actually in the process of collaborating on an article on this exact topic right now.
Awesome.
So how do you tell a child that is under the age of 5 that, your parents are getting divorced? Because oftentimes we assume, oh, they're little, they're going to be fine. And oftentimes we either don't tell them or we tell them very abruptly, and what that can really do to a child and that functioning. First of all, it's that the one thing that I've noticed the most with little ones is that they immediately think that they did something wrong. What did I do that my parents are getting divorced? And of course, as parents, I think we can come to the agreement that in a divorce, the one thing that we do agree on is that we don't want to harm our kids in any way. And we really want to make it as easy as possible for them. So you could see that as a positive, as something where you can actually come together for the goodness of another little being. And so to ideally, to prepare for it first, if it is possible at all to be in a scenario where you can do it together, it's obviously going to be age appropriate. And even if they're babies, to still have that discussion with them and reassure them that it's not their fault. In age appropriate terms, it could be, mommy and daddy just are not in a place where they want to be together anymore, but it's not your fault. We both love you. You're going to have both of our love no matter what happens. And even if they're babies and they don't have language yet, it's the energy you're emitting. I think you said just a little bit ago that children are very intuitive. Children can pick up on your energy like no other. So you could be saying, oh, I'm fine. And they're like, no, you're not. They know the difference in that energetic feel. And so to really be able to include them as part of the process and not just assume that because they're little, they don't need any to know anything. That is something that I highly recommend, that you actually take the time to sit with them and explain what's happening. 1, 2, changes, the kinds of changes that are going to happen, because usually it's very rare when you see that the child's going to stay in the same home and the parents are going to rotate in and out. So I would beg to have the parents think, what would it look for you to have to rotate in and out of a house every few days? Because now you start to see what that perspective might be like for the child. And so if it is the child that's going to be rotating back and forth, to really have a heart-centered discussion around what are going to be the biggest changes. Maybe that little one is really used to Friday nights being family night, and to be able to say, okay, well, this isn't going to be in place, but what is it going to look like instead? So as much preparation as possible as to what it's going to look like, and to make them a part of it so that they have a little bit of a heads up is really helpful for little ones. And you had another, I could keep going on forever, but I'm going to pause right there in terms of 2 of the things that I think are the most important.
Yeah, and those are very, very important. Well, you were starting to touch on what's going to happen, like a schedule wise, after people move out. You were just referring to what we call in the legal community nesting, which I tend to think is not a very good way to proceed. I think people love having, they're saying, oh, my child's going to stay in their same bedroom and we're going to rotate in and out of the house. But in my experience doing this 20 years, it causes more problems than it solves, even for a young child. So let's assume that that's not going to happen. And we've got two parents who are now going to live in two different houses.
Which is usually the case.
Yes, which is usually the case. So can you talk to me a little bit about your experience coming from the background that you have? What kind of parenting plans typically, and I know every child's different, so we're being very broad here, but what kind of parenting plans typically are best for children in this age range, basically pre-primary school age, where you're not even dealing with school?
Absolutely. Most ideally, too, when you can have both parents involved, it's so incredibly important. I often hear, especially dads, say, oh, they just need mommy. They don't need me. That is so not true. Your kids need you just as much as they need their mom. It's a completely different interaction. It is so important for them to know that there's still stability from both ends. And so to really be able to be apart from both ends as much as possible. And I know it's always going to depend on the family circumstances and what makes sense and schedules, but just to, again, belief. It's a belief. My child doesn't need me. Is to start shifting those beliefs, because they do. And that may look different for everybody, but that may mean that you're calling every day because you want to check in with your child. And you'll notice, especially when they're 5 and under, that their attention span is very different, that they may not want to be on the phone with you. That doesn't mean that they don't want you. That's just their age. But what they're starting to wire in their brain is mommy or daddy calls me every night, no matter what, whether I want to talk or I don't want to talk. It's not dependent on me, because the one thing you want to really avoid is this dependency. Like, if I don't do this, then mommy won't love me. If I don't do this, then daddy won't love me, because kids start to associate things together. So if we could do things and let go of the outcome or the expectation of what it's supposed to look like, and just do it because, hey, I'm going to call my kiddo tonight, even if they're on the phone with me for 30 seconds. That's an example. For little ones, I would really highly recommend, as much as possible, using technology to support you. So now we have FaceTime, right? We can do phone calls and they can see your face, even if they're babies. And now there's so many great things that we can add in. Like, there's apps where you can do interactive things. You could draw with your kids. You could play games on the phone together during that phone call. But it's really a mindset of remembering that you are important. Whether you're mom, whether you're dad, you're always going to be important. And that you factor that in when you're coming up with a parenting plan, because your limiting beliefs, your unconscious beliefs are, I'm going to say, pretty often going to get in the way as to how that parenting plan is set, especially when you're in a state of distress. When you're going through a divorce, you're making huge, giant, big decisions when you're not at your best. And so those limiting beliefs are going to kick in harder than ever, especially depending on the reasons you're getting divorced. There's a lot of feelings of guilt, of I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough. Those kick in really hard during a divorce. And this is when you're deciding what your kids are going to need. And so is taking those things into account.
I think what I'm hearing you say is that when they're very young, it's important that you have regular contact with them.
Absolutely.
And that's really the key. And it doesn't have to be in-person contact. It could just be like, and it could be for 30 seconds. And it's just those touch points that create so much in a child's mind. I really like that. Now, you just said a second ago about how some fathers will feel, a young child should be with mom. Let's go the other direction, though, because I see it more often the other direction, that mothers tend to have this belief that young children should be with them and they need to be with them to the exclusion of their fathers. Some people call that gatekeeping. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but I would like you to address that a little bit, because obviously our audience tends to be more male on this podcast. And one of the fears that most men start going through when divorce is, on the horizon, is this feeling that children are going to get taken away from them. That especially young children, that there's still this belief in the world that young children should be with mom. And even though in most of the country, you and I are on the coasts where really there's not any kind of, we used to call it primary caretaking role. Young children used to be with mom. That does not exist anymore. There are obviously some judges who still have those biases and feelings, but more often than not, a lot of mothers will also feel that and say, okay, my kid's 18 months old. No, they're not going to go sleep at your house. No, they're not going to go do this. How do you, and now you've got a child in the middle of this who is hearing things. How do you deal with that?
That's always a tough one, isn't it? And I do see that quite a bit. Quite often, actually. I'm going to reverse a little, that I even see that in couples that are stable and still married, and where you don't assume anything is wrong per se. I'm going to use the word wrong, but you mentioned the word gatekeeping, so we'll call it that. But typically speaking, it's an innate feeling that we have as mothers that we have to protect our child. And that includes from dads, from other family members, from babysitters, from you name it. It is just this thing that we do without even realizing that we are doing it. So for example, even though as moms, we're also learning for the first time, if it's your first child, how to change a diaper. Okay, we change the diaper, and then dad comes in and changes the diaper. Oh, no. You got to do it this way instead. So that's an example of what we would call gatekeeping. And now all of a sudden, dad feels like, oh crap, I'm doing this wrong. And so now they feel, well, maybe mom should do it instead because I'm not good enough to do it. And then they start to pull away from the child. And now mom's resentful that dad's not helping. So it's this weird loop that we do unconsciously, and we're both playing a part in it as to, why things aren't going the way they're going. Because you'll hear the same thing in divorced families where mom says, no, of course you're not going to get to go to dad's, or you can't stay the night, or I can't trust dad with the kids. But then you also hear dad's never there. Dad's not showing up. How come they're not helping? So it's very contradictory, and we don't even realize that we're doing this. So again, it comes to that awareness as to what we're saying, what we're doing, because a lot of it is going to be unconscious, and these unconscious beliefs that keep kicking up that are going to push people away. So we're pushing dad away, but at the same time, we're getting angry because dad isn't in the picture. So what message is that child getting? It's a very contradictory, very, very split energy, because ultimately a child needs both parents. I don't care what's going on. Obviously, there's very particular situations where there's safety situations. So I don't want to be, I want to make sure that we're aware that in a safety issue, there are times when it isn't safe for a child to be with one or the other parent. But even when it isn't safe, I promise you that child still wants both parents. I'll give you a quick story that of a client I worked with. She was 11 years old at the time, and her parents were together. They split up for really awful reasons, because after 5 years, it was discovered that dad was sexually abusive to this little girl. And he ended up in jail, and I had to prepare her to go up on the stands and speak against him. And she had such a hard time, because no matter what, that was still her dad. And what she wanted was for him to shift, to become this being that she wanted, which was a dad that could support her and take care of her. And so even in those really severe situations, because that was a really severe one. Kids need both parents. So when we find ourselves, whether mom or dad, saying, oh no, I can't, I don't trust them, or I don't need them there, or they're going to be in danger, to really stop and think about, okay, where is this coming from? And how is this going to benefit my child? Is it really, or is this about me? Especially when we have so much anger inside, we can during that time of divorce.
I think it typically is about the parents when they're going through a divorce. This amount of selfishness that comes out when people are getting divorced is mind-boggling to me. And I've been involved in well more than 1,500 divorces. It's a common thread. And some of the interesting things you were just talking about in terms of safety as being a reason why, a parent maybe shouldn't have as much access, like unsupervised access to a child, perhaps. Those are relatively rare. But what you start to see when people go through a divorce is start to concoct safety issues that don't exist about the other parent. And the child hears these things because parents are so careless when they're going through a divorce. Maybe with older kids, not 0 to 5, but they'll leave things on their computer that children can easily read, or they'll have conversations, with therapists or attorneys or friends on the phone, in a room with a door shut, but be talking so loud, the whole house, they can hear everything. But I'll hear people come in and say, oh, he shouldn't have any time with the kids because, he drinks too much. Okay. And that being a reason why he shouldn't have 50% of the time, or she, I'm not going to be gender specific, why they shouldn't have 50% of the time. And I'll be like, okay, so do you want to do supervised parenting time? Oh no, weekends are fine. And I'll be like, okay, so this person has such a severe alcohol problem that you're okay with your 4-year-old spending the weekend with them, just not a whole week. And so you start to uncover people's true motivations, that it's really not about any legitimate concern. It's about control and trying to create a reason, because like you've been pointing out, there really isn't a psychological reason why a child shouldn't be with both parents a significant amount of time. I'm not going to use 50% of the time because that's a fraction. And when people tell me that, I'm like, okay, that's a number that doesn't really get to the heart of what's best for a child. But people will concoct these stories about the other parent. And there might be a morsel of truth in it, but most of the time it's an exaggeration, or it's not really a real safety concern. And they use it to try to exert this control over the parenting. But for our conversation today, I think what people need to understand is you're doing so much damage to your child by making them think there's something wrong with the other parent. And I can't even tell you the amount where children will, tell their parents different stories. And the reason they do that is because they want you to like them, and this might go to a core belief that you've created in your child, but they want to like you. So they might actually tell you stories about the parent that you don't like, that are negative, because it makes you happy that you said something negative about somebody. And I got to tell you, Karen, I've been involved in cases where children have reported like sexual abuse that never happened because the other parent, consciously or subconsciously, invited those kinds of stories to be told about their ex. And it's insane. So, I mean, the conversation we're having today, we're talking about like just raising a child that can thrive into adult life, but there are serious consequences to create an environment where children really think something's wrong with the other parent. Have you experienced this? And if so, what are your feelings about it?
All the time. I actually worked for the Department of Mental Health for 15 plus years. And so it's parents making calls into Child Protective Hotline. And a lot of times, it was determining, wait, is this real safety issues, or is it more of a family law case where it's just two parents angry at each other? And quite often there wasn't an actual safety issue. And a lot of the calls we got were for parents that were just upset. So two things came up for me, and I'm so glad you bring these topics up because they're so incredibly important. One thing that I don't think people in general realize is that the first 7 years of life, 7 years, our brains are in a state of hypnosis. So there's brain waves, and most of us function in what we call beta waves, where it's where we work and we're doing and when things get done, and then we go into alpha and theta waves. And in those waves is where our subconscious gets programmed. That's where all those beliefs kick in. And so our kiddos are actually in alpha and theta waves for those first 7 years. So they're literally in a walking state of hypnosis. So whatever you're saying, whether it's related, even if it has nothing to do with the divorce, maybe it's a belief about money or a belief about how hard you have to work to be successful, they're hearing it and that brain is getting wired. So when we go back to divorce, even like you said, you're in the next room where you think, oh, they're little, they don't get it, they don't understand, or maybe they're not yet verbal. It doesn't mean that they're not picking up on all of the messaging and all the energy even around the messaging that you're saying, and that becomes their truth. So all of a sudden, not only is it about them having a hard time with the other parent, now they're developing internal beliefs about themselves, about the world. And how do you think that'll play out when they're adults in a job, with their neighbors, in their own relationships, with their marriages? It's going to play out. And I'm going to take a stab here, and I'm going to assume that as parents, we don't want our kids to experience the things that we're experiencing. I feel pretty confident about that's one of the reasons we want to protect them from the other parent in our heads. But really what we're doing is the complete opposite. We're setting them up to have beliefs about themselves that are going to repeat the patterns that we're experiencing ourselves. And I think that, for me, that's eye-opening enough to make the shift, to really be intentional and pay attention to what I'm saying. What messages am I sending about men in general? Because let's say you have, or women in general, you have a little boy or a little girl, and now this is what they believe about other men, other women. And so what does that look like in their relationships, in their world when they grow up? So that's huge to pay attention to what you're saying. Even if you have a 10-day-old, it doesn't matter. It's still the same effect. We're still building the brain, and we're still sending messages that are going to completely affect the way that little one views the world for the rest of their lives.
So important. And I would say you do all kinds of nonverbal cues that you don't even realize. The thing I always think of is the eye rolling. You know, like child comes in and tells you what happened at the other parent's house, and you roll your eyes, or you make like a visual like sigh or something. People do it. They don't even realize they're doing it. And I think I really feel like the big issue is that people just are so consumed with anger sometimes that they just forget how to control themselves. They forget that they have a little one in front of them. And, they just really almost sometimes, and then the worst part of this too, is that people will use their children almost as a therapist to like actually talk about the way they're feeling. And this, not the right person to be doing that to. It's so important. But people that are going through a divorce, I mean, all parents can intentionally or unintentionally do things that damage their children in ways that are both visual and not visual. But when you're going through a divorce, you can really do even a lot more damage. And I like what you were just talking about, teaching your children how to view relationships, view potential, people they're going to be with in the future. Like, what does a healthy relationship look like? What should you expect? What should you tolerate? What should you not tolerate? What does happiness look like? Because they're learning from you. This is one of the reasons why, Karen, this is off topic for today. This is why I'm a big proponent of, this whole idea of, if you're in an unhappy marriage and you and your spouse are both unhappy, you should, try to work on your marriage. Fine. But at some point, if it's not going anywhere, don't stay married. You are teaching your child that being in a very unhealthy, unhappy relationship should be what they're striving to, because they're watching you, they're looking at you, they're seeing this. And particularly, and then in addition, like if you're in an abusive relationship, this is why I see a lot of I see a lot of men in particular who are abusive towards women. We always we find out very often that their fathers were abusive towards their mothers. And that's not by coincidence. People are learning how to treat each other. And I hope people listening to this today just understand. I mean, we're just talking about like just making you aware that this is an issue. This is like surface level stuff today.
It really is.
There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do, but I don't think people even realize this. I know I learned about the development of a child like in the early years when I started doing mindset training when I was in my mid 30s. So I didn't even learn about it until I already had a child. And when I had her, like this all happened when she was already older than 5. So I was flipping out about, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? But it's not all lost. I think what we talked about today is there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a way to come back from it. But it all learns about it. You have to educate yourself first and then figure out those steps to help your kid. Karen, in terms of getting divorced, I think I already know what you're going to answer, but I don't want to lead you. What is the best way for two people to actually sit down and resolve these issues? I'm sure you're not going to tell me it's to go into court and let a judge make a decision about all of this.
Absolutely not. No, mediation is, to me, life-changing. I don't know how else to say it. Some sort of mediation, coaching, something where, I mean, here we've been talking, how long have we been talking for? About 40, 45 minutes. And like you said, this is like a scratch of the surface, because how many years of beliefs do we have within ourselves? Are they really going to clear up when a little quick meeting as to, okay, this is what we're going to do? No, it does the opposite. It actually gets you to fight even more. And you start hearing words like win. Like, really? What does that even mean? Do you want to win in a divorce, or do you just want to be in a good space? Do you want to just have a good life? Because it happens. Life happens. There's nothing wrong with getting divorced. It's how you go about doing it. There's nothing wrong with falling in love with someone and then realizing that you've become two different people. And that's okay for your kids too. You want to show them that it's okay to be human, that it's okay to, make mistakes, that it's okay to fall and get right back up. It's how we do it. Because it's gonna happen. You're gonna roll your eyes. You're gonna say things you regret. But then how do you come back from it? How do you repair it? Because it's all in the repair. I promise you that your children are gonna remember how things were repaired and not what actually happened. So even if you have like a little meltdown, the kids will remember that mommy or daddy came back after we were both calm and we talked about it and we hugged and we made it better. That's what they're going to remember, and that's how they're going to problem solve themselves. But we lack the repair process in the world in general. It's all about like me, go, fight. And we don't repair things. We leave them hanging. And what that does is just adds more crap to our own way of being and feeling about the world. So to me, in mediation, you actually get a chance to repair. You get a chance to look at things from a different perspective. You get a chance to really sit down and think through things from the frontal lobe part of your brain and not that instinctive brain that's in fight or flight. When you make decisions on a fight or flight brain, I promise you, it's not going to be pretty. And so mediation to me slows things down a little bit. And it gives you an opportunity to come together, because there's always a way. There's always a way to do things that's specific to a family, that's individual to a family, because every single family is different. There's no one size fits all. But when you can actually sit down in a way where you have a neutral party that can really guide you and listen to you and understand both sides and help you find a way, that is truly magical. And now you're teaching your kids that you can be human, you can fall down, and that there's a way through.
Well, as a divorce mediator, I agree with you. No, it is the best way. It's problem solving. You got to learn to problem solve when you're getting divorced so that you can continue to problem solve the rest of your children's lives. And the second you let somebody else make decisions on your behalf, it becomes harder to problem solve in the future. For all the reasons you just said, mediation is the way you should, resolve your divorce. But it's as simple as you've got to learn to resolve things. You have to. Although your children deserve it. They deserve you being able to sit down with your ex-spouse and resolve all the issues that are going to come up during childhood. And there's going to be many issues that come up. I'll give right now, I'm trying to decide what elective my daughter's going to do in middle school. And I got to tell you, there's a disagreement with my ex. And it's absurd because it's something as simple as that. You have to learn how to have those conversations outside the presence of your child and try to have a united front so that you can, help your child as best you can. But it's very difficult. Being a parent, it's got to be the hardest job in the world. And it doesn't get any easier. And when you're split, not to say anything about maybe getting remarried, having step parents and this conversation.
This is like 7 more podcasts.
Oh, seriously, we could go on and on. But it's very, very difficult. Now, Karen, if anyone wants to reach out to you and get more information from you, maybe even work with you, how would they go about doing that? Can you give us some information?
Absolutely. So I'm the founder of Lumitot, Lumitot. That is my company, and we focus on pregnancy in the first 5 years. And we actually teach a method to it's the roadmap to parenting. I like to think of it as this is how you get a degree in parenting so that it is easier and so that it is more in alignment and so that both you and your child get to tap into that unlimited potential. And so on socials, I'm Lumitot. Website is also Lumitot. And I actually have a couple guides even that you can get if you just go to my website. One of them that I really like that might be helpful for this audience is 44 phrases we inadvertently say that lower self-esteem and self-worth. And we just say them, we don't even realize, like, oops, I didn't realize that was having that impact. So that might be a good one because I feel like as parents, again, we're repeating things from our past and reliving the way we were raised. And we don't even realize that we're saying or doing things that could be impacting in a way that's not ideal for our kids.
Awesome. Well, all of that information will be in the show notes below, including I'll get a link for that guide you just talked about. We'll stick it in there too. That way you know exactly what she's talking about. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you being here today and sharing your expertise on this important issue. I hope all of our listeners learned something very, very important from you today.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be your guest here today. I love what you're doing. It's so important. And it's just great to see the support you're giving people.
Well, thank you very much.